Hi, welcome back to McClutchy Maths. My name is Natalie McClutchy and we are continuing our video series today on the 2025 updated syllabus for Queensland. And our video focus is on how to write a problem-solving modelling task. We're looking at FORMULATE and a new section called Mathematical Translation of the Task. So before we get started on our video, I just want to tell you a few little ways that you can engage with us further here at the channel. First of all, you could like and subscribe and hit that notifications button so you'll always know when the next video is ready to watch. You could join us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. There's also a new button on YouTube now called Thanks. It's a little love heart button, and that's where you can donate $2 or more to the continuance of the channel here, because there are ongoing costs to keep this channel going to you to watch for free. And you could also tell us in the comments if you saw something in the video that you liked, you've got a question that's a small question, something easy to answer, why not to ask us there in the comments. And there's more information later in the video about how you can ask longer questions. Okay, let's get started. In this video, first of all, I'm going to show you what FORMULATE section now looks like in the 2025 ISMG, standing for Instrument Specific Marking Guide. And then we're going to get into some more detail on this thing called mathematical translation of important aspects of the task. So here is what our new FORMULATE ISMG looks like. So we've got these three sections here. Obviously, we want to be achieving in this top section here. And we've got these new words justified. They weren't in the old one. We used to have documentation instead of justified. So we're going to look today at what we're meaning by the word justified. We'll talk a little bit about assumptions and observations, but our next video is going to go into a lot more detail about those. This row here is our main focus today. How do we translate important aspects of the task? What are the important aspects of a task? Now you'll notice as well as we move down, these things like the words justified jump out. The word important is changed to relevant, and justified and important disappears off here. Obviously, we don't want to be achieving in this standard box here. We want to be getting up here. So let's see how we can do that. So first of all, the word justify is where we get the word justified from, and this means that we're giving reasons or evidence to support our answer. So as we're talking about statements of observations and assumptions, we're giving reasons why we've made those observations and assumptions. It's also shows or proves an argument, a statement or a conclusion is correct or right and is reasonable. So this is what we're looking to do. It's sort of like the documentation we used to have to do in the old ISMG, but now it's using this word justified, which is more aligned to what we see in our cognitive verbs that we're expected to do right across our subjects. Okay, so let's now talk about what is meant by important aspects. Now this is going to be all down to what is your teacher's judgment. What do they think are the important aspects of the task? So that's a good place to start. Ask your teacher what aspects of the assignment are the important aspects. That'll be something your teachers come to agreement with the other teachers that are also marking your problem-solving modelling task. In this video, we're going to cover a few basic elements that are usually expected in that FORMULATE section of a PSMT, and that usually covers off those important aspects. And if your teacher's given you a template for your assignment, some teachers are really nice and do that. The subheadings in that template is what your teacher is expecting you to talk about for your important aspects of your task. Okay, so to get your assignment together, this is all about translation of the task. We usually start with an introduction paragraph. And in our introductory paragraph, it's going to state briefly what your report is going to explore. So a typical paragraph should have about 4 sentences. You'd be familiar probably with other subjects about peel paragraphs. You've got a point, you've got an explanation, you've got an evidence, and then you've got a link to the next paragraph. That's the kind of things we're expecting in this introduction. Typically, it should be written in future tense and in third person. It reads better as a report. However, you won't be marked down if it's not. It is a good idea to try and keep everything in the same tense if you're going to be writing, so not a mixture of future and past tense, just because it makes it more difficult to read. And typically, we do write in the third person as we're getting into senior high school. It's good preparation for writing reports at university. Okay. What you should have in your assignment. There should be some sort of context of the assignment. Someone should be able to pick up your assignment without looking at the task sheet. They should know, especially from reading that opening paragraph, what your assignment is all about. This is an example now of a student's work where they've actually talked about what their assignment's about in their introduction. I'll just read that to you quickly. The aim of this report is to observe the relationships between foot bone length and body height. So straight away, I can see from reading that opening sentence, I know exactly what the assignment's about. I know what we're measuring. We're also measuring arm bone length and body height. And to see if predictions of future height really can be made by measuring foot length. That whole sentence pretty much summarizes everything that's in that task sheet, and it's spot on. I don't actually need to even read the task sheet. I know what this assignment's about. Discovering any trends between this will help to explain how forensic anthropologists could use bone measurements to make predictions about a person's size, gender, age, ethnicity, and health. This is a really good summary of the entire task sheet. So it's only a couple of sentences. It doesn't need to be pages long, something quite short and to the point. It is succinct. Succinct means brief and concise. Notice it's written in the third person, and it's got a consistent person usage throughout that paragraph, and it's written in future tense because the assignment hasn't been written yet. Now, I did say that the whole assignment should typically be written in the same tense, past tense, but an introduction introduces something that's about to happen. So this is the one part of the assignment where you can talk about it in future tense. And like I said before, it's independent from the task sheet. I'm going to compare this to another student's example. This was an actual student who wrote this, although his name was not Alastair Jones. I changed the name to protect his identity. So this is an example of one that's very conversational. It's not very professionally written. Hello, my name is Alastair Jones, and today I'll be presenting my proposal for the television series Front Yard Fiasco. For my application, I'll be further discussing my ideas on which house I'd like to design and the budgeting strategies I will use to make sure that the limit is not exceeded or underused. Before proceeding into the budgeting and purchasing, we first need to outline the potential assumptions and observations. This will help me have a better view of the project and ultimately give me an advantage in the latter parts of the project. Now, we get a bit of an idea that we're doing some sort of budgeting for this assignment, although it's actually not super clear. This was actually a measurement assignment, measurement combined with budgeting. It was for year 11 in general maths, and it was combining two topics. Now, you don't get a sense of that here. You only get a sense that they're designing and they're also budgeting. The design wasn't actually part of the assignment. Also, in this opening paragraph, you can see a mix of persons. We've got I and we've got we. So that can be quite confusing to the reader. Who's doing the assignment? Is it group work or is it individual work? And it's just a little bit casually written. It seems like it's just a very general chit-chat as opposed to a professional report. So between the previous example and this example, we're wanting to get a more formal tone in our assignment, and preferably written in that third person. There was also some unnecessary explanation here because this was actually repeated again in the procedure. So we don't need to go into the procedure in our opening paragraph. That's a common mistake I do see students making, is they fill up this introduction paragraph with all of the steps of what they're going to do in the assignment, and then they repeat that again in a step-by-step procedure. This is really just something that should be 3 to 4 sentences at the most, outlining the topic of the assignment. So it is unclear from here what the assignment was about. I happen to know what it was about, and that wasn't clear from what was written here. Okay, the next subheading after you've done your introduction would be a great place to define your variables and your key terms. Now, I have a whole separate video which is in this playlist, and it's all about defining variables. It's a great video to watch if you're unclear about how to determine between the independent and dependent variable. Once you get into year 11, we call that the explanatory and the response variable. And if you have difficulty working out which one is which, that's an excellent video to watch. And I'm not going to waste time going into that here. But this is the paragraph where you talk about those things. It is a key, important part of the translation of your task. It's also, just as a quick recap, variables are those elements that change in the assignment. So they're things that you might hold as constants, things that you might measure, and things that you might keep the same. So do be sure that you watch that other video. This is also important that this is consistent with any graphs that you draw in your assignment. So typically our independent variable or explanatory variable is on the x-axis of a graph. Now, if you just suddenly start graphing but don't actually explain why you chose this variable to be on your x-axis, you are missing important aspects of the task. We also have the y-axis, which is our dependent or response variable. So that's also something you want to define at this stage of the assignment, because sometimes there's a very clear reason as why you've chosen to graph something on the x-axis and something else on the y-axis. It's a good idea here to say what the variable is, how you're measuring it, and you're measuring it in centimeters or seconds or grams, and why you chose that variable to be independent and dependent. So once again, this is a short paragraph. It could be done in dot point form, 1 dot point for your independent variable, 1 dot point for your dependent variable. So here's an example of how a student has done this well. So they've measured 4 different measurements. One of those is going to stay the same for every situation, and the other ones will be our dependent variables. And they've given a short explanation as to why they have chosen that. They've also given their units of measurement at this point as well, and they've given a justification. Remember that translation of the task has to be justified. So this is a reason why they've made this decision here. This is also a good place to outline some key terms that you might be using in your assignment, particularly if there's ambiguous meanings for some of those key terms. Now, these key terms would typically be somewhere on your task sheet. They may not be mathematical terms, but they might be things you want to define. This could be done in the introduction. It could also be done as part of this separate subheading. And part of that definition could also be your justification for your sample size or composition. And we're going to be going into, in a new video in this series, we're going to have a lot more information about how to select your sample. Now, you don't need to write a whole textbook at this point. It doesn't need to be every mathematical concept explained in great detail here. It's a brief part. It's an important part of the assignment, but it's not the core of what you're doing. So here's an example of somebody who's done their key terms in the introduction. So they've defined something here. In this assignment, they had to talk about celebrities and digital characters. So they've given a definition of what a celebrity is and what a digital character is. And notice that they've actually got a reference for that as well. That's part of a justification of your translation of the task. So that's a really, really good place to put that. They've put that in the introduction. So once again, using a source that helps to justify what you've said. This student has done it instead under a subheading, which is also a valid way to do it. So here, they've used their key terms. They've talked about how they measured those things, because one person might measure a foot slightly differently to another person. So they've explained here how those things are defined. They've defined gender as well. So this is important. Place to do it. Have a separate section where you define those terms. Now, this is the next part of your assignment, a clear and concise procedure. So it should be very clear, step by step, how to solve the problem, and it should be concise. It does not need to go for pages. I would recommend that you start when you get your task sheet. Sometimes you get your problem-solving modeling model on there, and you could start writing your procedure with the basic steps. And then as you start solving the problem, you may go back and continue to edit and populate this section of your assignment. One of the common mistakes I see students make is that they will write that procedure at the very beginning and forget to update it. So then they'll have missed key important aspects of the task, and then they won't hit that 3 to 4 range. This can be done as dot points and numbered steps. As I mentioned before, it should be concise or succinct. So it doesn't need to be super wordy, but it should be very clear and precise, not vague. So if you're talking about measuring something, as we saw on the previous slide where they talked about measuring as part of a separate subheading, that's classified as part of the procedure. So describe, if you're measuring something, measure it from where to where. In what unit of measurement are you going to be measuring that in? Anyone should be able to pick up your procedure and repeat your investigation or your experiment exactly as you've outlined it without looking at the task sheet themselves. Now, obviously, your friends are not going to be picking it up and copying it because that would be plagiarism. But the whole point is that someone should be able to, and they should be able to do the assignment without talking to the teacher. Here's an example of a great procedure. Notice it's done with numbered little points. It's references to different sections of the assignment. It's done as dot point, not full sentences, which is fine because they are steps. But they've got all the aspects in here, and they've managed to cover everything. They've been precise. They haven't just said drawn a line of best fit onto each scatter plot, because that could indicate with or without technology. So they've actually been precise that they did that by hand, and this one was done in an Excel spreadsheet. It's also pretty comprehensive. They've covered all the way through to the end of the assignment. They haven't just stopped at solve, but they've gone on to the important evaluation section, and it is covers the lot. You may also wish to have another subheading. So you've got your introduction, you've got your definition of variables and key terms, you've got a procedure. This is another place here where you may want to consider a separate subheading. Now, obviously, if you're going to have a subheading of considerations, you're not going to duplicate the information across multiple sections. So what I mean is, if under considerations you talk about how you came up with a sample, what sample size you used, you're not going to talk about that as well in the introduction and also in your procedure and in the consideration section. So pick one section and that's where you talk about it. So this could be information about sampling, as I've just mentioned. It could be things like, how big is your sample going to be? Why is it going to be that big? How did you compose the sample? So that's these things here, sample size and method. And do watch our upcoming videos in this series for more information on how to do that. It could also be key information about things that are unique to your solution. So for example, if you're doing a measurement assignment, your teacher may have given every student in the class a different block of land size. So this might be a good place to say what that is. Now, if that's the only thing you're going to put under your consideration section, I would actually recommend don't even have this as a subheading. Put that information in your introduction paragraph or in the first line of your procedure. So as I said, don't duplicate it across multiple parts of the assignment. Just pick one place and put it there. Obviously, if you have to talk about sampling and show some working for that, which you should do, that's your justification, then that would be best under a considerations heading. Here's an example of how the QCAA for their general maths exemplar has done it. So they've got a heading of considerations and they've talked about the sample size of 100 and how they came up with that square root of the population. So they've got this here. They could have also, instead of setting that out as a super big paragraph, they could have simply shown the working. I personally would have said population equals this, a square root of this equals this, therefore sample size equals this, and maybe a reference to show where you got this formula from. So this is a justified decision. It's justified mathematically, which is a super important thing to be doing with our decisions, which we're going to find out later as we get through this series. Here's an example of a student's considerations heading. They chose a sample of 45 as a sufficient amount of the data. They've gone with a different sampling method, 10% of the sample space, and they've got a reference here as well. So once again, this is a justified translation of the task. They've rounded it for a suitable sample size, and they've talked here as well about how they actually chose the data points. They've gone with every ninth data point. So that's a particular sampling method called systematic sampling. So they've given a lot of information there. This could have been done more succinctly. It could have been done as some working. They could have shown the working population equals 500 or 450. Then they could have done 10% of that and shown the working for 10%. So there are different ways to set this out. You just choose the way that's most appropriate for you. Okay, here's another example of how someone has set up considerations. They've just talked about the unique block size and the suburb. So this was related to a measurements and budgeting assignment that we mentioned earlier in the video. They've put this under here and they've got information unique to the response. And as I've said before, that could have actually saved a bit of space. Don't even put it in considerations. If that's the only thing you wanted to put in considerations, I would personally think that'd be best placed in your introduction paragraph or not under a subheading at all. Okay, the next important heading that you're going to want to consider is your use of technology. Now, if you've talked about the technology and how you're going to use it in your procedure, then you don't need to do it here. But if you're the kind of person who forgets to include things, then by all means, consider this section as a separate section. Just don't double up and repeat yourself in two different places. So this could be done, as I said, as a subheading, an introductory paragraph, or in the procedure. The whole purpose of it is to say what technology you used in your assignment and what purpose you had for that. Here is an example from the Math Methods exemplars from the 2019 syllabus. In this particular one, they've done it as part of an introduction paragraph. They've named the technology and they've talked about what they used the technology for. So that's done as an introduction. It could also be done under the subheading of use of technology. This was part of the general math syllabus here. And they've talked about the purpose of the technology and they've used a spreadsheet program. So what is the technology and how did you use it, or why did you use it? What was the purpose? The next section you could consider including as part of FORMULATE is something called mathematical concepts and formulae. This could be, once again, outlined as a subheading. This could be the subheading here. Alternatively, you could have it within the procedure, or you could even have it as part of your discussion in the solve section of your assignment. So I'm going to show you some different ways students present this information. It really isn't important where you put it, as long as you have it. Now, ideally, if you're going to be writing formulae, it's best to use equation editor in Word. There is a shortcut for that. You press your Alt button and your equal sign button at the same time, and the menu for equation editor will drop down. And then you can insert appropriate formulae. Now, not only does it look prettier, but it also enables plagiarism checkers to read your information. It looks much better than just snipping things off the internet or snipping things out of a textbook. Now, obviously, if you do go with this option, you definitely should source it, because now you're taking someone else's work and including it as your own. So you would definitely need a source. Now, with each formula that you introduce, you should give a very brief outline of its purpose. I'm not talking about a paragraph here. I'm talking about a single sentence or a half a sentence. For example, if I included the formula for the mean, I should then have the formula. I should say formula for the mean, formula, and then next to that, this will be used to calculate the averages of all of the bone lengths, if that was the context of your assignment. So here's some examples from different students' work. This is from a Year 12's assignment. They've set this up as a table. So they've got the name of the formula, what the formula is, notice they've used equation editor, and a brief explanation of why they are using that formula. So this is one way you could present your mathematical concepts. It's very clearly identified, and as I mentioned, they've used equation editor and they've related it to the task. So once again, this does tick that box for mathematical translation of important aspects of the task. Now notice here, they haven't given formulas for the mean, they haven't given formulas for standard deviation, they haven't wandered off and given formulas for the range and the interquartile range, because this is a bivariate data assignment. They're not the most important aspects of the task. So in this case, they've just focused on those important aspects. Notice here they've also popped in some information about dependent variables. So they've defined a variable in this section of the assignment and the independent variable. So there's, as I've said before, there's lots of different ways you can present this information, as long as you have the whole lots of the important tasks. Whether you do it under subheadings or different sections is not key. Here's how another student has presented the information. This was for a Year 10 assignment. This is not using equation editor. It doesn't quite look right, but you wouldn't really be penalised for that. It would be better if it was written as a formula. Notice here, this here is not a proper formula. A formula has an equal sign in it. It has something equals something else. This one up here is a proper formula. You can see y equals mx plus c, but the one underneath has not been done properly. This one's a formula. That's not a formula. So it's important, if you're going to be presenting formulae, that you actually do it correctly. Once again, they haven't used equation editor. You can see the difference from the previous slide, how much easier it is to read, whereas these ones here at y1, it's no longer a subscript. It should be a subscript because it's a naming convention. Now it looks like 1 multiplied by y, which is something completely different. Here's how another student has presented it. They've actually done it in Word. This was for a junior assignment. So they've described what it is. They're calculating the mean. They've given a little brief explanation of how to do it, and then a simple sample one. So if this was a senior assignment, you would lose marks because it's not written as a formula. It's not a mathematical convention to write it this way. But for a junior assignment, like a Year 7 assignment, it would not be an issue. Once again, you don't need to necessarily do all the working at this stage. If you're only presenting your mathematical techniques, all you need to do is present the formula, because in your solution, you're actually going to show the working there. You don't need to show working in this section of the assignment, because all you're really doing here is saying, here's the formulas that I'm going to use today. And then later on, you're going to show how you use the formulas. So you don't need to do it twice. Well, that's all we have time for in this video. Those are all the things that you should include in FORMULATE. You should have that introduction paragraph. You should have some mathematical techniques and formulae. You should have a procedure. You might have some considerations. You should be defining your variables. So all of those key things could be shown in a number of different ways: tables, dot points, paragraphs, single sentences. You need to work out what works for you. Have a chat to your teacher about what they're expecting to see as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions about anything you saw in today's video, here is the place to meet us, mcclatchymaths@yahoo.com. Long questions in the comments under the video are hard to respond to, but this is a much better place and you will get a faster response as well. Well, my name's Natalie McClatchy. Do join us for our upcoming videos. Have a wonderful day.